Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our Equity Explorer webinar. I'm Karina, a global equity investment specialist at Fairtree, and I'll be moderating today's discussion with Janku, our analyst. So the Equity Explorer series was designed as a teach-in on topical subjects in equity markets. We're just trying to provide some deeper insights into key industries, companies, and just trends that are shaping global investments at the moment. So ultimately, our goal would be to equip you with better knowledge and help you understand the driving forces in the markets and uncover opportunities within them. However, please do note, this isn't financial advice, nor is it a deep dive into our portfolios. And with that, I'm very excited to introduce today's topic, which is on GLP-1s, the weight loss drugs that have taken the market by storm. So today we'll look at trends that have emerged in the industry, and we'll also focus on the two market leaders, Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk. So please feel free to send through any questions during the presentation by Janku, and we'll try to answer as many as possible at the end. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Janku, who'll take us through today's deep dive on GLP-1s. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar. And for those of you who aren't on track to reach your New Year's weight loss resolution goals, all hope is not lost. So we'll be touching on a few of these revolutionary weight loss drugs. So let me kick us off. So just in terms of the agenda, first we'll be touching on the obesity landscape. Then I'll do a brief introduction of the GLP-1s, some key features, go through industry debates, and a brief financial overview of the two companies. So firstly, when we're looking at the obesity landscape, so the four graphs here on the screen, you can see it's split between adults and children, adolescents, and being overweight and obese. And then you can see since the 1980s to the 2000s that obesity and being overweight has become a global pandemic. Being overweight and obese has become much more pronounced as the years have progressed. And you can see also there is discrimination between income cohorts as well. So you can see that high income cohorts tend to be more overweight and obese than low income cohorts. And this is due to our changing external environment. There's technological advancement. We are living more sedentary lifestyles with reduced physical activities, and our diets has become more calorie dense. And you can just think about all of the processed foods that we are eating. And quite an interesting stat, more people in the US die of too much food compared to too little. And then what's also quite a disheartening statistic is since the late 1980s, childhood obesity has doubled from 10% to 20%. And even when you're including being overweight as well, that number is closer to 40%. BMI is obviously a very crude statistic in terms of measuring whether a person is overweight or obese, because it doesn't take muscle mass into account, but it is a nice proxy in terms of seeing what these developments and how these developments have occurred. So how broad-based is this? On the graph at the left, you can see that in the US is by far the obesity is by far the most prevalent in the US compared to some of the Asian countries where it's much less prevalent. So you can see there Korea and Japan around less than 10% obesity prevalence. And what's also quite disheartening is in the US, if you include people being overweight, so BMI above 25%, then 73% of the US population is overweight or obese. And then you can see on the right-hand side, if you look at the US population by weight, I would like you guys to focus on the dark blue and the light blue bars here on the right-hand side. You can see that people with severe obesity and being obese has grew quite a lot. So taking around 22.9% to above 40% from 1988 to 2020. So why is this a problem? It's a problem because being obese or overweight, there's a lot of comorbidities, so associated diseases that comes with being overweight. So in this graph, you can see on the y-axis, it shows proportion of people that's still alive, and on the x-axis, you can see the age of those people. And then the 3 different lines just categorizes these people in different BMI ranges. So the green line between 22 to 25%, so classified as being overweight. The gray line between 35 and 40% BMI, and then the dark blue line 40 to 50% BMI. So that's morbidly obese. And you can see in this red block here, at the age of 70, 50% of people being morbidly obese are still alive, and that compares to 80% people being alive that is just classified as being overweight. So it's obviously a very strong association within obesity and decreased life expectancy. So the impact of obesity on all-cause mortality. So if you split BMI into different categories, you can see all of the associated diseases such as hypertension, prediabetes and diabetes, chronic kidney disease. Prevalence of all of these diseases increases with increased BMI. So that obviously has a major impact on what overall healthcare costs would be if you compare people that are overweight compared to people being morbidly obese. And then this obviously has a very big impact in terms of what the overall healthcare cost would be for different individuals in different BMI ranges. So thinking of what medical costs would be, so whether these drugs will be covered by insurance or not, if there's a downstream improvement in other types of associated diseases. So the implication on medical cost. So this was the study was done in the US, provided by Novo. So you can see with BMI ranges that comparing someone with a BMI band with or normal weight of below 25 to someone being classified as with a BMI above 40, there's an 86% rise in medical costs. And as I just alluded to in the previous slide, people obviously with higher BMI are associated with more diseases, so cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and increased blood pressure. So in terms of insurance coverage, this is a key theme to consider, whether obesity medication will be classified as a chronic medication because of the associated cost savings due to more illnesses becoming less pronounced. So it's similar to doing maintenance on a car where you maybe service your engine instead of the car breaking down somewhere further along the road. So comparing that to someone looking at their blood pressure and cholesterol and probably preventing a heart attack further down the line, which has much higher costs related to it. So a brief introduction to GLP-1s, just very fascinating to me. So on the left-hand side, you will see this is the Gila monster. So scientific researchers observed that these lizards live in the southwestern parts of the US. They can only eat a few meals per season, and that they can stay alive. Also, their bite is very toxic, so be aware if you ever encounter one of these. And then in 1980, endocrinologists actually found out when they're looking at the human's gut hormone. So we have endogenous GLP-1. So this is a GLP that's produced by our body. But this GLP-1 that's produced by our body has a very short half-life. So that just means that the circulation time in your body is quite short. And when they compared it to this external GLP-1 found in this Gila monster, they found that the half-life was much longer compared to humans. So with that, they started doing more research on this, and they found out even when you take this external GLP from the Gila monster, it should significantly decrease people's appetites, and it was very efficacious in terms of how long it stayed in your body. And then in 1996, the first successful GLP product was launched. This was produced by Amylin Pharma. In 2002, Eli Lilly actually partnered with Amylin Pharma and launched a product later in 2005. This was a twice daily injection, so this is quite strenuous in terms of how it's administered. I don't want to do an injection twice a day. And these drugs were also not very efficacious at the beginning, but a lot of modifications has been done on the molecule to make it much more effective. Then in 2014, Lilly launched a once weekly injection called Trulicity. These from there also this also had modest efficacy and poor tolerance. And then in 2017, Novo launched Ozempic. This is probably the drug that most people on the call would be most familiar with. It's also a once weekly injection that has very good weight loss potential. And also these drugs were initially developed for being used in type 2 diabetes, but has been prescribed in more recent years for off-label use for people being overweight or having obesity. So this is a very busy slide, but I'll just try to break it down in small steps to give a brief explanation. So firstly, there's a difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes and also obesity. So type 1 diabetes is a genetic disorder where your body doesn't produce insulin or amylin. And then type 2 diabetes is lifestyle related. So your body cells reject insulin, so you can't lower blood glucose stores, and it stores excess blood glucose as fat or adipose tissue. Obesity is obviously also lifestyle related, and where your body stores excess fat from blood glucose being too high, and which is interesting, 80 to 85% of people with type 2 diabetes is caused by people with obesity. So you can see the strong relationship between why obesity is so important for type 2 diabetes developing further down the line. And then just in terms of the hormones, insulin, so this is a hormone produced by the pancreas that lowers blood glucose, and glucagon is a hormone produced by pancreas that raises blood glucose. So you can think in terms of the GLP and GIP. This is two active ingredients in the drugs that we're looking at today. One, you can increase insulin, so you can lower blood glucose, or you can inhibit the release of glucagon that will also assist in reducing blood glucose. And then why I put this basal insulin in here is just drawing the distinction between type 2 diabetes and type 1. If you have type 1 diabetes, the GLP-1s aren't going to help you because your body doesn't produce insulin, so you have to take an external form of insulin. So that's why people that have type 1 diabetes have to walk around with the injections, or now there's automated pumps that people are using now. There's also quite interesting work being done on that. So just looking at pharmaceutical intervention in weight loss. So how can you tackle weight loss? This is Schalk Burger tackling Dan Carter in what seemed to be a quite controversial tackle, but thought it was fair. You can tackle it through behavioral changes related to consumption and physical activity. You can do surgical intervention, mainly bariatric surgery and gastric sleeve surgery. And then you can also do pharmaceutical intervention. And this is where this GLP drugs fit in now. So bariatric surgery has been around for years. It's been the most successful in terms of overall weight loss, but it is, however, very invasive and quite risky. People suffer from internal bleeding and infections, and it can also lead to further long-term complications such as bowel obstruction and vitamin deficiency. So quite a risky surgery to undergo. And then looking at pharmaceutical intervention for weight loss, it's been around for quite some time. So as I showed in two previous slides, it's actually come from the late 1990s to the early 2000s. But the efficacy and tolerability levels weren't enough to enable large-scale adoption. So that's recently changed since around 2015. And you can see the most efficacious weight loss drugs currently at the market reaching around for almost 20 to 25% weight loss, which is at the lower end of the gastric sleeve surgery, but obviously much less invasive compared to the surgery. So when looking at some key features of GLP-1s, so how effective are these drugs? I just want to highlight at the beginning. So all of these drugs for Lilly and for Novo basically have the same active ingredient, but they are prescribed in different indications. So if you compare for Novo Nordisk Ozempic to Wegovy, this is the same active ingredient, but prescribed at different milligrams and also for different indications. So either for type 2 diabetes and or obesity. You can see in the red blocks with the red bar graphs, these are the drugs that's currently on the market for Eli Lilly. They have Mounjaro on the market that's prescribed for type 2, or sorry, for obesity. This is a very, very potent drug, 22 kilograms of weight loss from mean body weight at the beginning. And then Novo Nordisk now recently did a study on CagriSema, which is the dual agonist drug, achieving a 21.8% weight loss from mean baseline body weight. So also very effective drug. And then what happens after you stop using the GLP-1s? So you can see here on the graph at the left, so this just takes your body weight percentage change from baseline. And then at the x-axis, you can see the time since the injection or the drug has been started to be taken. But then at 68 weeks, people lost around 16 to 17 kilograms of body weight or percentage weight loss. And then after they climbed off of these drugs, you can see that the weight loss they've lost has largely been regained. This is largely due to metabolic adaptations where your body goes through. So your body produces hormones at the new baseline body weight that only adjusts 6 to 8 weeks after you reach that targeted body weight. So say you weighed 100, you lost 15 kgs of weight, and now you weigh 85 kilograms. Your body still produces hormones for when you weighed 100 kgs 6 to 8 weeks after weighing 85 kilograms. So you're still going to be as hungry as when you weighed 100 kilograms, even whilst you weigh 85 kilograms at the moment. So that's the reason why it's so difficult to lose weight and to keep the weight off that you've lost. So just on the right-hand side, you can see, I just wanted to highlight here that with greater degrees of weight loss, so in the yellow here, people losing 12 to 13 kgs and people losing 17 kgs, there's a greater degree of discontinuation, and that's because of how these drugs work. There's more adverse effects if you think of some people losing such a drastic amount of weight in this time frame or period of time. So just comparing the main drugs for Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk. So the first thing I want to highlight is that these drugs can be prescribed for primary indications or type 2 diabetes or obesity. So Eli Lilly has the same drug on the market. It's called Mounjaro for type 2 diabetes and Zepbound for when it's used in obesity or weight management. And for Novo Nordisk, their type 2 diabetes drug is Ozempic. And then the obesity weight management drug is called Wegovy. Ozempic has been the market leader for the past, say, 2.5 years. But that's more recently changed, and that's because they've received approval already in the US in 2017 already, and for the weight loss drug in 2021. So Eli Lilly was a bit behind there. And the reason for Eli Lilly having a slightly more efficacious weight loss drug is because they have a dual mechanism of action, so a GIP and GLP, so one suppressing glucagon and one stimulating insulin release, while Novo Nordisk only has a GLP-1 receptor agonist, so single method of indication. So you can see here the efficacy of weight loss is slightly better for Eli Lilly's products compared to Novo Nordisk's. All of these drugs are injected once weekly, so it's not very strenuous in terms of how it's administered. And the key competitive advantages for Eli Lilly at the moment is the greater efficacy, and Novo Nordisk with the Ozempic brand familiarity, and they also had earlier market entry. So what's the adverse side effect of these drugs? Most common ones are gastric related, so nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, but the prevalence isn't as high. Most common side effect is nausea, between 17 and 25% for Mounjaro and 15 to 20% for Wegovy. And then the other adverse side effects, the rates are much lower. These GLP-1 drugs, they delay the rate of gastric emptying, so it takes more time for food to digest through your gastric tract. So that just means that you're going to feel fuller for longer and have a sense of satiety. So it makes sense that these side effects comes with the rate of delayed gastric emptying. And then while the prices of these drugs extremely expensive in the US, you can see the list price is around $1,000, so around 20,000 Rand per month for these indications. They're much cheaper in South Africa. And I also just want to highlight that there's a difference between the list price and the estimated net price. So the net price is what these drug manufacturers actually receive after rebates and discounts. And that's more closely to $300 for these drugs, so much cheaper. And that's just because of how the US pharmaceutical systems work, where drugs are bought and distributed through a PBM and sold through retail pharmacies, and insurers cover these drugs, so they get a portion of the rebate which they pass through to the consumer. So looking at the total prescription market share, you can see that Novo Nordisk in the green line was the market leader for quite some time, up till 2022. But that's recently changed since, I'll say, probably the mid-2024. And these two companies, Novo and Lilly, basically operate in a duopoly. Novo has lost some share that's due to a whole range of factors, but the most important ones I would highlight is because Eli Lilly released a direct-to-consumer offering, and almost a year ahead of Novo Nordisk. So they supply these drugs at a lower cost, also circumventing the PBM and retail pharmacy channel. They were also quite innovative in terms of having vials being able to be distributed. So having a injection syringe with a vial instead of that pen that we've come to be familiar with, because that pens were where the most of the supply bottlenecks were. And one of the other factors was Novo also actively decided to lower supply in lower dosages. So how these drugs usually work is you'll start with a lower dosage, so say 2.5 milligrams once weekly injection, and as you get used to that, you move up to 5 milligrams or 7 milligrams. So Novo actively decided to lower the supply in lower dosages because as they wanted to have adequate supply when people titrate up with these drugs. How has growth been? Growth has been extremely robust. You can see that Mounjaro, owned by Lilly, they're currently doing around 500,000 scripts per week after 3 years of launch. So you had 150 weeks. It took almost twice the amount of time for Novo to reach this 500,000 scripts. So around 6 years. There's a bit of volatility in terms of this prescription volumes. It's just due to supply constraints, but most of that supply constraints bottlenecks has been resolved. So some key industry debates. So consumption and behavioral change. So what actually happens? People between males and female on average, they looked at the calories or the amount of calories consumed before and after using these drugs. At a high level, people consume almost 50% less calories. So that's why this weight loss actually occurs. And then there's also certain preference changes within this. So the graph on the right looks at the change in food category consumption since starting the drug. It's interesting to note that more unhealthy, more processed and calorie-dense foods such as salty snacks, carbonated drinks are being consumed less. Alcohol was also highlighted there. And then if you look at more healthier types of food, fruits and vegetables, weight management food, poultry and fish, there's actually a net increase in consumption. So it's quite interesting to note. And if you think about our very high level view of, say 10% of the global population goes on these drugs, and 10%, and they consume 30% less calories, that can potentially be a 3% consumption headwind, which is material. But there's obviously, all calories aren't created equal, and most likely there will be some categorical differences within that foods that will be consumed more or less. So looking at insurance coverage, so this is the main insurance channels in the US. So Medicare and Medicaid and commercial, both of them cover roughly half of the US population. Medicare doesn't explicitly cover this weight management drug at the moment, and that's because under Medicare, obesity isn't classified as a chronic disease. Although these drug manufacturing companies have started to do a certain method which they call backdoor reimbursement. So Wegovy is currently approved for cardiovascular benefits. So that's the associated comorbidities that gets improved with reduced weight loss. So there are some of these companies, or most of these companies, are now actively engaging in doing more studies showing the improved benefits of comorbidities so that they can get reimbursed for those types of illnesses. Medicaid also doesn't cover at the moment. There is limited number of states that cover, but they usually follow the Medicare approach. And this will also, coverage would probably take longer, because you saw the price of these drugs at the moment at the $1,000 list price. It's very expensive. So if there's more studies being done, seeing what the downstream benefits and improved cost would be per beneficiary, like the coverage could expand. And looking at commercial, 20 to 40% of current employers cover anti-obesity medication. There is, however, clinical restrictions, and that's because of high cost and long payback periods. They will also likely expand with targeted employer types. I've seen some articles talking to this as a means of attracting employees, especially considering the high cost, and this also relates to a more productive workforce. So just running through a few graphs on the financial of these companies. So this is the rebased revenue figures for Lilly and Novo Nordisk in USD, and you can see growth has been extremely robust. If you look at Lilly and Novo, doing excess of double-digit growth rates for the past 10 years. Novo slightly outgrowing Lilly over that period just because of the earlier to market launches. And on an earnings basis as well, paints the same picture. These companies generate very high returns, also very high margins, and you can see the effect of this growth rate is much more pronounced on your earnings numbers as well. And then just looking briefly at the share price performance. So the graph here is rebased to 100, and then UBS constructed very nice indexes that reflects the basket of companies that are affected from consumption changes from this GLP-1 adoption. Companies that are expected to benefit are grouped as this GLP-1 winners, and companies that are expected to be disadvantaged is grouped in this GLP-1 losers. So that would be companies being exposed to confectionery and salty snacks and alcohol maybe, and carbonated drinks. And you can clearly see in the blue shaded area that there's been a stark divergence in performance between the respective participants. But you can see there's been a pronounced period of underperformance for Novo Nordisk, and that's due to some of the factors that I've highlighted. Firstly, because of Eli Lilly's superior weight loss, so comparing that 22.5% weight loss to 15% for Novo. They've also been better at supplying the market. That's what I showed, where it took them 3 years to reach 500,000 scripts, where it took 6 years for Novo. And then also that's due to them launching their direct-to-consumer offering earlier, and also having the vials. And finally, there was a Novo Nordisk most recently announced the clinical trial for CagriSema, which is their dual agonist, which would compete head-on-head with Eli Lilly's dual agonist. The drugs achieved around a 22% weight loss. People were actually experiencing or expecting superiority compared to Lilly's drugs. So expecting 25% weight loss, but they actually just performed on par. So that's why they've been underperforming over this period. So just to conclude, these drugs are revolutionary and immensely powerful, as you can see. It has the ability to change human behavior. And in the investment sphere, there will be numerous areas which one can be selective to benefit from this theme. There will also be areas that you should be cautious in that could potentially be disrupted. So I hope everyone enjoyed the session and hopefully learned something new.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Janku. That was really awesome and really insightful. We've got a couple questions that have come through, so maybe we can kick off with those. Yeah, let me get going. So the first one is basically people are trying to understand how durable the competitive advantages are that are held by Lilly and Novo in the GLP space at the moment. And then maybe if you could also just elaborate on the role of patents and protecting their market position and how long that sort of exclusivity is expected to last.
Okay, thanks, Karina. I believe the competitive advantages are quite durable, given just how the market is structured. It's basically a duopoly, just those two companies competing against each other. And also just given the sheer size of these companies, they also have a competitive advantage in terms of supplying the market. So you can see suppliers ramped up immensely over the past few years. Novo Nordisk actually announced the acquisition of Catalent in December, which they paid 16 billion for in an all-cash transaction. So it just shows the strength of these companies' balance sheets and their willingness to invest in this. In terms of the role of patents, obviously Novo Nordisk, they launched earlier as they got FDA approval earlier in the US. So their first patent cliff for Ozempic is in 2027, and then for Wegovy, their loss of exclusivity is 2051. Eli Lilly has a slight advantage there, being on a comparatively better footing, having patent cliffs for their obesity drugs in 2033.
Brilliant, thank you. And then maybe we can just discuss any long-term health concerns or side effects with chronic GLP-1 usage. Obviously, nothing is set in stone at the moment. But yeah, if you just give us some of your insights and your learnings.
Okay, so there hasn't been much studies done on the long-term side effects, because if you think of Ozempic being launched in 2017, you maybe have now 8 years data if people actually had continuous usage. As I alluded to earlier in some of these slides, most of the short-term side effects relates to the reduced rate of gastric emptying. So people not craving food, being nauseous, and having signs of constipation. But it is important to note that for a lot of people, this is the first step towards living a healthier and more balanced lifestyle. So if you think about being obese and it actually being quite a debilitating disease in terms of what you can do, people can now start walking and maybe running and joining clubs. So I think I've listened to a few podcasts as well where doctors and physicians have talked to how this has changed people's lives just in terms of things they couldn't do before going on these drugs and things they can actually participate in now, which is, I think, immensely powerful.
Brilliant, thank you. And maybe just one question, I think this would be mainly on your opinion, but is BMI still the most relevant measure in 2025? And is it the most suitable for all population types across different cultures and races? And are there any alternatives that you have come across in your research?
No, I think BMI is a very crude measure because it doesn't take into account muscle mass. So there are a lot of people that I know that are extremely fit and maybe spend some time in the gym, and they would be classified as being obese or overweight, having BMIs of 28 to 30. I think the most accurate measure, you can actually do body fat percentage tests, but that's obviously much more expensive. And I think on a standardized basis, this is using BMI is probably going to be the standard, just because of how cheap it is to implement and do like studies across broad populations.
Brilliant, thank you. And then maybe just think we maybe have time for 1 or 2 more questions, and we'll get back to the rest of the audience via email. But given the rebound in weight after stopping GLP-1s, is there any ongoing research into sustaining weight loss post you stopping the drug? And are there any maintenance sort of therapies that have been considered in the research?
Cool. Yeah, so a key feature of our bodies adjust to new weights relates to our hunger hormones, which is ghrelin and leptin. So ghrelin shows or is used in your body for indicating how hungry you are, and leptin is a satiety hormone. So when taking this GLP-1s, ghrelin and plasma concentration actually decreases, so feeling less hungry, and leptin concentration increases, so feeling more satiated. So typically when people stop using these drugs, as I showed in one of the earlier graphs, you can see that it means rebound in body weight. So your body basically resets to its normal hormonal levels for ghrelin and leptin. So people titrate up with these dosages to reach their targeted body weight, but I think this will become more of a chronic type medication where you titrate down again, maybe going back on the 2.5 milligram. But there's obviously a lot of associated health benefits. So you can maybe not be on chronic medication for cholesterol or blood pressure anymore, but maybe just take a GLP-1. But it's still too far out to call any of that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Janco. Maybe if I can just squeeze in one last question. Maybe you can just elaborate a little bit further on what sort of impact widespread GLP usage could have on the food and beverage industry moving forward, mainly the likes of fast food and that type of industry.
I guess so, as noted earlier, on an aggregate consumption basis, if 10% of the global population goes on these drugs and eat 30% less calories, that could be a 3% headwind to consumption. But there will be areas that that companies benefit. So we've seen companies like Bowring Brands, they've done quite well because they have slim and protein-rich foods that's offered to the market, and then other categories such as confectionery and salty snacks that's generally less preferred and people consume less of. I think as adoption increases and a greater portion of the global population goes on these drugs, we would see a much more pronounced impact. But there's still, I don't think there's a real impact that can be seen in some of these companies' numbers at the moment.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Janco. Thank you for all of your insights. I think this is a really exciting industry and one that people are trying to understand much better. So hopefully we've given them that today. But yeah, so that wraps up our session for today. And like I said, a big thank you, Janco, for all of the information. And thank you to the audience for all of your engagement and your questions over the session. If you have any further questions, or if we haven't answered your questions, we will reach out to you, or you can just pop me an email. But yeah, thank you again for joining, and we look forward to seeing you on the 12th of June. We'll be discussing advertising, specifically looking at Meta and Alphabet. So also a very interesting session. So yeah, we look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.